Ngaroge Dubata Timba, Tachiran Geshina, Tachiran Chirangi Dubata Timba Chegurua Salawayana, Chirangi Dubati Carreras, Chirangi Deva Deguduas, General, the social Geshina, and the Devan Dena de Judu, that Dubala do city Shegure, the Shebala Chi Nyasaji Logure, Chituguruas, that Turbi Dandayam, Mano Chitugu Machivri, that the Karina saying Chiroa.
So at the moment, we are receiving teachings of the Dharma. We're engaging in receiving the teachings of the Dharma. It is therefore, in the beginning, one should be one's own tutor or the teacher by asking a question that, why am I here? For what purpose I'm here today? And spending a couple of hours by receiving these teachings. And what should I do? It's now here a purpose of receiving the teaching is to achieve what we long to achieve. We have been longing to achieve something from the beginning of time up until now. It is for this purpose we're here, to achieve or to fulfill one's wish. So what is the wish? What that we are trying to achieve? As always, we're trying to achieve happiness. The happiness is something that we all long to achieve. So therefore, this is the wish that we need to fulfill. So in order to do that, what kind of causes and conditions that leads to happiness, which give rise to happiness? So therefore, it is for this purpose, in order to create a cause, in order to understand the proper causes and condition for achieving happiness, we receive the teachings. The teachings is the method or the means for enabling one to understand what is the causes and condition for achieving happiness. So therefore, we're receiving the teachings. And teaching must be received from the teacher, or what we call the unmistaken teachings, must be received from authentic teachers. That is, thus, we're receiving the unmistaken teachings from the teachers at this point.
인자는 다 등주지 녀고요 인자는 당에 거스 보고 되게 거스 봐봐야니 다 아니 지 뭐네 뒤서 정으로 제송하잖아 따주 유네지긴 뭐네 시와이나 안 당문에 될 하와요 말에 손대지 아니 자가 있다주세는 걔네마 다다 더블인디가나 야 만호와다지 세신이어바데 다 벽이 남비 담바 될 하지요 말에 손도 인자는 거스 보고 맞대는데 Chenye because was on there around China. Girls on Boyang sang it.
So it is now at this time one should rejoice in one's own conduct, which is the virtuous conduct, the time that we are taking and engaging, receiving these teachings and spending a couple of hours to receive the teachings, which is worthwhile to be rejoiced. And one should feel that how fortunate it is for me to be able to receive such a teachings with which constitutes a perfect views. His Holiness always emphasized that the teachings, when it comes to the teachings with the philosophical views, among all the teachings, the great Indian ancient teachings is said to be the superior. At this point, His Holiness always said that if you, with regard to the spiritual teachings with a spiritual, philosophical standpoint, if we were to think that which was the superior teachings, we could say, unhesitantly, we could say, without a doubt, we could say the teachings of the Tibetan Buddhism at this point is very suitable for each and every one of us.
다 된저지게 삼발로 뽑아 세그라 다 프로하운드 지에비 토네 네네 템버투비 온보 다 온보라 나레 집에 남아노 제고 되게 지에비 바체 아니 대야 된저게 꼬등에 대야마 선전의 대 추송신 바다 투 제신 바슈는 게 지에비 바체 아니 라하다라냐 선전도다야 동해 제지 선전 아니 제와야 지 자신 바라고 지 상하도네 되게 일러도는 게 대바당 아니 제진이 생겨도네 거기서 보면 내가 최신인지 제가 나와서는 소소소래야지 로이스 되는 용비 된다라는 맞아요. 가만히 있으면 되겠다.
With this in mind, one then visualizes Buddha in front of oneself in the space and surrounded by all those great lineage gurus of the deities and the stages of the path to enlightenment, or the Lam Rim lineage gurus. And not just visualizing them, but imagine that Buddha and all other lineage gurus are, gazing at yourself delightfully in the manner of giving Dharma teachings, and imagining being yourself in their presence, surrounded by all other sentient beings who are undergoing tremendous amount of sufferings, who wish to achieve happiness but unable to achieve, and who wish to avoid suffering but they're unable to understand what kind of causes the condition that give rise, that eliminates the sufferings and so forth. With this in mind, having a genuine faith towards the Buddhas and the lineage gurus, and cultivating a genuine compassion towards all other sentient beings. And with this in mind, let's take a couple of minutes to meditate.
되게 찔러도 단데 가서 지 진짜 다 진양도에 세대 사회되는 양치 동바리지 상바도 소치고 상바에 상마로 가서 소주되는 놈이가 하다마다 하마에다 집에 저사 나 창조 폐그랬어네 아니 가서 남아서 소주만 놈이가라 다 얘기도 로데 내지게서 되게 대다 되고는 소주 나와비 뭐베체 그거래서 가서 좀 하나지니 지 가서 다 장소 첨보라 아니 가부유 추바나 이용거래서네 손진도 와대 가서 산나도 동바리지 인사말에 뭐네 폐기해서
So the way the reason why we are visualizing and imagining we are with all other sentient beings without exception, it's not something that we're just imagining. It has a great significance. It has a great significance of visualizing, imagining being yourself with all other sentient beings. It is therefore, whenever the great teachers, at the beginning of their teachings, they call out all sentient beings, including Deva, and demigods, Gandharvas, Nagas, and all. So therefore, they would always say, in the language that is to be understood by all those particular individuals, such as Deva, Naga, Yasha, and so forth, may I turn the wheel of Dharma. So this will be, the universal slogans of all the great teachers, when they, in the beginning of their teaching, this will be recited. So therefore it says, if one is able to visualize and able to imagine that all those sentient beings are in a presence, so it says that all of those, beings, the sentient beings, including the protector deities or the local protector deities or the white-sided protector deities will be gathered and listening to the teachings of the Dharma. So it has a great benefit. It's not something that we're just empty visualizations. It's a great benefit and also a great significance as well.
아야, 다들 이제 되게 멋있어. 아야, 다들 이제 아니 그런 치바지는 컨셉버시 있지. 아니 상주 런처링 바스. 아니 상주 살람 줘야. 아니 런처 버스나 레종런스나. 그지 종런스나. 맞아 상주 종런스인데요.
So with these motivations, the teachings that we are receiving is a great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, which is the actual path to enlightenment, the path where we all need to travel on. We have to make a journey on this particular path to achieve state of enlightenment.
죽은 쯤바 때문에 제법이 저와 세대 덤바 투병한 비고송도 제에 대전반에 랑게 제자에 나면 받지 니 제법 담반나제 니 고송도 제에 대전 아니 대전반에 니 죽은 쯤바 때문에 제법이 저와 전례를 지로와.
So remembering and recalling qualities of the Buddhas and lineage gurus all the way to one's own root gurus is the importance in the beginning to understand the greatness or to show the greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as noble source.
잠깐 조어치 당시와이나 덤바 투병한 뭐지 아니 저와 상방 공부 아니 땅 공부를 주 아니 가서 봐봐 토메스나 배경 공부를 주지 저와 상방 공부 대정 모두 제송아 아니 되네만 주어지 받에 아대세나 성조랑 저러나 아니 되네 아니 정말로 뭐 저거 같은데 성조랑 저러 봐서네 나는 제대로지 가도 무슨 지종 정책 무슨 공부 산다고 들어.
So now if you were to condense the visualization of all those lineage teachers, the great lineage gurus, one can visualize Buddha Shakyamuni, Maitreya, Arya Nagarjuna, Arya Sangha, Atisha, and Lama Tsongkhapa. So those are the unbroken lineage gurus.
아니 나가라 기바집에서 취지쳐와 소나 아니 다니 변화 안 되러와 랑리 첨모스 송들에마도 변화 라마츠기 또바랑질을 준비 냥거를 냥이 또는 뭐 소셔야 돼. 네 버지체 말하기 냥거 소와나기 아니 냥거 ro nyanyu yu to go ten ja de ma su shang chu lang ri din den la ni lang ri nyang go so ro ta ko je ba no lang ri chen bu ri je ro mo che nyang go yu de re se so yin na jing de re do.
So it is then, this will then be followed by the second outline, the very second important outlines, which is Dangwa le Gubeke, which showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings. For that, the teachings that we are receiving on the great deities on the stages of the path of enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa is something that whatever his, all this realization that he may have gained is expressed through words or written. In other words, it is a hymns of the great realized beings. We have Lam Rim Tuntu, which means the condensed meaning of the Lam Rim Chenmo is Lam Rim is said to be the hymns of the Lama Tsongkhapa, the hymn that is written by the great Lama Tsongkhapa. And this is the Lam Rim, the great teachings on the stage of the path of enlightenment, is a commentary of that. So therefore, it is, the realization of Lama Tsongkhapa is written in the form of text.
Nye dus nyanglen cheba yin chano so nyanglen dus jesho da doban dus chonggu le sen ro nyen jo nge jo nyanglen de da je tande che de je chong se lo so ai ni be song bi ye de ro de jong de ro da.
So therefore, this is the text, what his Lama Tsongkhapa has stated, that I myself had undertaken such practice. May all the practitioners who long to achieve liberations must do the same. So what he means by saying, I, yogi, who have gone through this, who have undertaken this practice, is practice here referring to the stages of the path to enlightenment.
Mane chenanda nga so jerom bo chen na yin ji chungwe mare se na mane po ta mo ne she chube so le jero nga so nga chi gelu ba chi ye she bo che ke cha marwa ta jerom bo che thoma phe bi ka la ni je zen ke ga den ru gi je se so ne pe ka che jong le ya la yu le phe ne de yi ka la yu je lama kan chu chi shu ya na ris ma chi bi gi cha la tu yong chen de ma si sang ge ye ya ma so ba den zhe yi yong su zo ba zi ne ni ji bi gi zhu dan zhe ji la ni da da ma so yi yong chen je de de zhe lo.
So it is undoubtedly and unhesitantly can say or claim that there has not been anyone, learned individual like Lama Tsongkhapa. It is not just being I myself as a follower of the Gelug tradition that I'm praising and claiming Lama Tsongkhapa's quality. This is not I, but the reality is this. If you look at here, how much the great teachers Lama Tsongkhapa actually relied upon. If you think about that, and if you look at the backgrounds of the Lama Tsongkhapa, at the central Tibet at that time, the Dharma is said to flourish extensively in central Tibet, but Lama Tsongkhapa had, relied upon all those, non-sectarian great masters, and received entire teachings of both Tantra and Sutra. And receiving the teachings and undertaking practice and gain spiritual high levels of spiritual realizations. And all this, whatever the spiritual realization he may have realized, is then written in a text.
그래서 뭐네 전화도 봐. 이 초연도 지로. 그냥 가서 정으로 지지 세제다의 세제는 다음에 아니 벽까지 전에 비지 정신다 뇌는 메시아. 영어로 좀 친구나 장애 레신인 거 강코나 자오로. 아니 주부 담바세에 제바제의 여러 매기 전체에는 아니 세미 주부 롱어지기 제선 라고를 말도 지금 말했을 때 이게 빠티 맞서반의 주변 나시오 코로나기 배저 동의 지름아도 지 구전에 주반양에 전에 마대는 손을 싸니는 지금도 이거라 하나 대리선에는 잠블린지 계시는 건 잠블린 꼬라자네 주대통령 조설 지뢰도
So here now, it is, if you really look at, especially the writings of the Lama Tsongkhapa, it is something that is so, if you really look at and study carefully about the teachings given by the Lama Tsongkhapa, it is really a mind captivating. It is something that is so, by means of going through his teachings and studying the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa will really uplift your mind. So therefore, if you look at the teachings of the great teachings or great texts written by the Lama Tsongkhapa, the Dangye Leksin Nyingpo, the essence of the definitive and interpretive, amazing teachings that you will find. And therefore, whether the teachings is authentic or not, it depends on the authenticity of the teacher himself. So therefore, the teachings that we are receiving is not something that someone just claimed that him or herself has gone through a great retreat and come out of that and written the texts. It is something that has been analyzed very carefully and written very carefully based on the logic reasonings. So therefore, it is worthwhile to be appreciated.
다 저원이다 되게 줄내니 히쳤다 샤와지 담범 절로마치 대체 이르바 담범 절로마치 대체 이르바라니 나저 사와 신이 때비스다 때는 로치다 샤 이르바니 안티바도 소로지 되는 만도
So with this two greatness will then be followed by the next outlines, which is the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions.
때는 로치다 샤 이르바라니 디에테나 니고네 비슈크와다 니고 치다니 비츠니 다 도문지사 다 니고 치다니 비츠더라니 나치 나자라 니바제 니보네 지모치 다 도문지사 다 니보네 지모데라 송 주부 중에다 대모에 나제를 마냐서는 주부 전다 대모 주부 챔피언 나제를 마냐서는 지지 다 도문지사 다 주부 챔피언 나제를 마냐서는 질러 송 태전한 주비고 생제 관나된바 생제 제다 지비츠 생제는 쇼발로 지지 다 도문지사 다 생제는 쇼발로 지라 송 생제는 로발로 로그비 전세 로발에 레올로 로베 산제문 주바 템바 로발로 로베 remba 니시바지 다 도문지사 다 로발로 로베 remba 니시바라 라 니 태진 태바첨버 절라로 제다 니 도제 태발로 지지 니 동보라 니 송래 상세절 로발로 런데 장와 장내 저세제 담바송 손에 제다니 지지 다 도문지사 다 손에 제다니 비치더니 콜로로 비제 델라로 델로바는 비제 델라로 비림바지 단 도문지사 다 델라로 비림바다니 셔바 절라로 제대 제바도 파제 타만이라 지지 다 동보라니 랑게 산제 주민바시가 파라시마 로제다 제지 주민바시가 대용무바시가 로지지 다 동보라 주 신바 로지 추전 로지 조바 로지 전제 로지 시라 산데 로지 시라 로지 다 대용노 용아서 시바 전제 로지 제세제 담바존에 네 유동이 시바라 로그베 노예네 파라시마 주요노 용아서 시바 전제제 파라시마 로지 데라 고스포
We're on the particular chapters of receiving the teachings on the Bodhisattva states. Out of 6 Bodhisattva states, we're on the 4th Bodhisattva's practice, the practice of perfection of joyous perseverance.
다 대노게는 아주 전지제 여와라로 여와마다 배나 전지스나 니 여와라 저기 전지 니 여와잖아 니 동보 고치 전지 니 여와치디 전지 신제대제 전지 성원지 다 전지게 전지 냥산에 치텔라 아니 용 뭐에 배나게 니 제스 쇼와라 예존에 되게 니 전지들 니 제바 성위인세 니 가스들 소소아
So then having said that, we're on the perfection of joyous perseverance. And what is meant by the joyous perseverance? The joyous perseverance is having a genuine enthusiasm when focusing upon something virtuous. In other words, having a genuine enthusiasm in pursuit of engaging in the virtuous activities. That is what is meant by the joyous perseverance. And it is divided into, when it comes to the division, there are three parts. Armor like joyous perseverance of the gathering virtue, joyous perseverance of achieving acting for the welfare of other sentient beings. And there are many teachings on the joyous perseverance based on a different teacher. However, in the Lam Rim Chenmo, the Lama Tsongkhapa has given these teachings on the joyous perseverance in accordance with the teachings of the Shantideva.
당가 좀 당가 좀 가르치는 장구여 말에 성인들까라 아니 시시절려로제 아니 샤와니신절려로제 당가서 때로와 그냥 제마 제근이 생에 지길려로제 아니 나다다 칸구민도 생들려로제 아니 내 제투구민도 대성이 가서 주야들에서 와라.
So why really prevented us from having a quality of this joyous perseverance? In other words, the perfection of joyous perseverance. It is because of our three kind of laziness: the laziness of procrastinations, laziness of contemptuous attitude for oneself, and then laziness of engaging in meaningful activities. Meaningless activities.
당에 제투구민도 세대라 가서 진로벨려라 세우니까 다 가르 제투구민도 세대 근데 상제기 고pon생에 대 던저지게 토투 게 제투구민도 다 고본 터발라 나냐네 더지 제고네 제투구민도 다 던저기 나냐네 제발라 아니 마다 코이네달라 던저 이름을 대도 마 대투구민도 세네 나가서 손바텔라이네 코이네라 이름을 대투구민도 세야게네 되게 가샤데 까.
So now here, by receiving the teachings on the perfection of this joyous perseverance, one should then cultivate opponent of those three laziness: the laziness of procrastination, laziness of contemptuous attitude for oneself, saying that I will not be able to do it, and the laziness of engaging in meaningless activities. So here, most of the time, we always look at the text and then say that it requires an immeasurable length of time to achieve state of enlightenment. It is therefore, this is not something that I can do it. So this is one kind of laziness that really actually prevents us from practicing the perfection of joyous perseverance. Those need to be negated. This needs to be eliminated from our mind, from our mindset.
땅아 가서 피제 대인서宣주기 뒤치등에 장진에서 디바 번시 동에메 키비셔는 메가메 데타 로바 또바다 디바 센다 류르네 선나진의 류데라 케바이네 세 데나 젠데 코와네 장네 이제 제다 제대 쪽 시다 피제 대인서
내가 이해를 하거든요.
아니 동부 뒤치디 제장로 제다.
So here we're on the page 192, and we have covered the first paragraph, page 192, and we will begin from reading this: engaging in the bodhisattva states. It says, engaging in the bodhisattva state says, since sin is eliminated, there's no sufferings. Through knowledge, there's no lack of joy. Misconception and sin harm the mind and body. Through merits, the body is blissful. Through knowledge, the mind is too. Through remaining in cyclic existence for others' welfare, why should the compassionate ones be disheartened.
되래. 당가 속하시 대로 코안에 이르는데 내면 투비 진세 가르세나 아니 동해 들리지게 코안에 제나 동해 때다 대시샤와 녀구도 인산에 나 코안에 이름 뭐 되는 게 선적이 된데 제토사 말에서 나유디 아니 다가 저라기 코안에 되는 이름 뭐 되는 개체가 말에 가르세네 디바 마저이나 네 동해 요구 말에스 아니 코이 랑신 내단데 시에서나 차단 수점면나 아니 센라 대화 연구를 리센라 대화냐나 아니 이런 거 가서 되나요? 강에 지어요 말이에요. 간다대.
So they here now, as we mentioned earlier, that I may not be able to engage in the practice to gain state of enlightenment, because in order to gain state of enlightenment, one need to endure in cyclic existence and undergoing sufferings for immeasurable length of time. So I may not be able to do that. I may not be able to, it is not possible for me to work for the welfare of all other sentient beings. So if this is why, because here the particular the verse, it says that so long as that you have not engaged in any sinful activities, in other words, the negative activities, you will not have sufferings, right? So long as you have clearly understood the nature of cyclic existence, having understood the nature of cyclic existence, you have eliminated the attachment and aversion and sense of competitiveness and so forth, then you'll have no suffering, the mental suffering and for the physical sufferings, without which there is no there's not even a slightest problem for the individual who has such qualities being in the cyclic existence for the immeasurable length of time.
안디치. 다 되래 오든 단데 제가 용도. 시다한지. 대 종의 긴세위 상추 센제 다션 데네 대원도 와라. 센시스시 줄루 줄을 시에서 어서도 될 뒤중 가서 용다 정으로 뭐지? 정도 하대.
So this, the next the verse is verse that is His Holiness the Dalai Lama often quotes this particular verse. It says, and also, thus after mounting the steed of the enlightened spirit, right, which dispel all dejection and fatigue, you proceed from joy to joy. What sensible person would become discouraged?
안디치. 때때로와 단지 란이를 리서기 강에 매비 토네 아니 젠라 제외 신화도 지고야나 아니 은혜 깔레지 진요 말어 은혜 전 깔레 진요 깔레 매비 강에 아니 요 란지기 요때데 코네 컴퓨터 로고야나 아니 은혜 될 빠숑나 가르친 데 그래서 저러와.
So that now this what it really says is now, as long as you have no sufferings of physical and mental sufferings due to one's own intense compassion and love for other sentient beings, one will then develop one's one's spiritual realizations from joyful from blissful existence or another blissful experiences.
시소지 대전도 뒤빠데 멤버 고장 이 shum바 메자데 뒤르와 장주의 점이 비셔로 스테레.
So then here it's clearly mentioned that likewise, do not become discouraged even by being delayed in the cyclic existence for an immeasurable length of time.
또 아티시온도 데타 동해 신의 체나 뒤통양 조라지 동해 매지 데나 뒤르양 매조이 시대는 전청할래 송도아데레.
Then because a long length of time is not itself and reason to be disheartened. If suffering is extremely intense, even brief period of it is disheartening. But if there is no sufferings and you're happy, even a long time is not disheartening. Nagarjuna's precious Kalan states.
되서는 가서 리바산도는 뒤지는 가서 용다로 앞에는 사체질 대회야나 내가 동보는 가대서 이런 거 대인다 자치보면 로그 인세지 나한테 저거 로고야다 야 지보도 대게 있을 때 뒤진 가서 기로와 지 대투도 mentu 제마제 생에 되게 동해다 때려 요매 개체레마도 뒤ren통데 아니 조이 좀 말해서도와
So therefore, it has nothing to do with the length of time. It is to do with the state of mind here. That is what it meant. Because, for instance, if one is visiting at different places where one is planning to stay there for, like, let's say, for example, a week or so, and you really once you reach that destination and you reach that place where you desire to be, and you stay there for a couple of days and you don't feel really good that particular place and you don't think that is a good place, and although that you have a plan of being in this particular place for a week, but you just live there for only 3 or 4 days and then you leave because you don't like it, right? Then on the other hand, you may have planned for being at that particular place for a couple of days, but you really, really enjoyed the place where you are. And then you extend your stay in that particular place and you ended up staying for a week instead of, 3 days or the couple of days. So it is a state of mind, not just a place or the environment where you actually live, whether it makes you suffer or whether you think it is a place that is free from suffering and so on.
방아석이 상주 선배질가 차잖아도 지당 가서 상주 선배는 지범이 비거스게야만 지단전에 빼셔서 터자르마도 뭐네잖아 코너 디파메게 와서 기야 마사비 릴레 되어서 게면요 아니 거의 따탄지기 왜 그동안을 동네 강가 제투비 강라 근데 선제 강가 니에도 따투와이나 니 강가 줘버래 대대미시는 대 스시로 소소 강에지야 매비 돈에 니 줘버 투제 강가 니 차고야나 대다 가세년도 되나 지사로.
So here now, Bodhisattva's practice is here. Now, if one is able to develop such a state of mind that one have a genuine consideration of all sentient beings as one's own loved ones, someone whom you really care about, and then regardless of who they are, if you really care from the bottom of your heart, and extending your love and compassion towards them. And there's nothing to be hesitant. There's nothing that makes you unhappy to be with, right? As long as you have developed such a genuine state of mind. So you can stay as long as until the end of samsara with those beings, regardless of who they are.
以前了，这我修行不是老有的，我从这我是的没嘛，他们这我是的，如着我今天说呢，他不三百一百呢，让出学了说的就是吧，这我修行不他感觉生前谈起来这我的有晓得，他感觉等这个年少的这我修行我也别搞了，让你刚是让你了，两行以前呢，即三百他不强的，空着一直是他把的真不见呢，去他不强用我。
So here now, if one develops a genuine sense of caring for others, a sense of connectedness with others, and such a quality of mind, the development of such a quality of mind will soften one's state of mind, one's mind. It will soften one's mind. Whereas if one develops anger, for instance, which really hardens your mind. So there are one that actually softens one's mind, and there's another that actually hardens your mind.
Yeah, but the true thing is, now that you know that, that's why you say that all the things that we need to see are not so sad. So you listen to the things that you hear. 아니 타고도 강가도 소소 제와 pop in the Zewi Rangshin. But the money channel telegy at the Pendosa maybe sorry, Jiro, just about the Pendichane, Sanjay, Tanda Zela, the Triggy Santa Lewe Jiro.
So this is how the state of mind is developed by the bodhisattvas, right? It is really true because if you have this genuine sense of caring and developed a genuine love for all other sentient beings, instead of having a genuine wish to achieve enlightenment and transcend oneself to the blissful or the Sugavati, you will have a strong courage to be within the secular existence for the benefit of all other sentient beings. If you have actually developed the genuine sense of caring or the love or compassion for other beings.
Yeah. The Triggy Losho Jayita, chatting on a sort of shoe, chatting down with the Tiki chatting the pitching us on the Jajan, Jajan, Dinchokana, Matsukangal, Zangri, Lanem Turmato.
Where the problem for us, we're unable to do that is because although we do have all those resources and conditions to practice, to develop such a state of mind, the problem with us is we're not actually practicing. We're not really engaging in genuine practice. That is the problem with us. Other than that, we do have all those resources. Out of, I would say that 70% of the resources to practice, we do have the 70% of resources to practice.
I saw in a sunny decorated the sunny day, you do the ability to make the local train dead or Matomana, any depunct decision, the chair, any Gendal Academy Shamba that Sewa Kono Jong, message Masachi Chinsan Kishanaya, a digital source of the chat in the door. Roa. Penangasu Ganilla and Soso Dipa Masa, any don't lead don't Yongomare. That Kui Ranjin, the Kui Netan. Juma Dabichi Kana Kanzaji Shetona, call it Zumbachi Dembazina, not a Chegua.
So here now, if one is able to engage in such a practice, engaging in the practice of the virtues, engaging in the virtuous activities in our day-to-day life, in a family level, in other words, it will also set an example for our other family members, where they can follow your footsteps. That is such a wonderful example that we can set. And so if one always engages in the practice, in the positive deeds, what makes one to disheartened? There's nothing that can make us disheartened as long as you engage in the actions of your body, speech, and mind are virtuous.
Teacher, Ranger Timale, don't hear all the Tutoya, Zoka Diri Michikoch, don't hear Meji Dewala, Tired teacher Chishin, Della Lucha don't hear me, Yiji don't hear Kala. Then a Nijin Jite do, Deni Jina, Urine, Davis Hanje, Rintoshi, Lord Demba Jimmy Lu. Niese yente dendone dela ta de beba sha xieso song de dish.
So here then it says, the Nagarjuna's precious Kalin states, when suffering, even a short time, is hard to bear, what needs mention a time that is long? Well, but when free of sufferings and joyful, what harms you over even endless time? Bodhisattvas have no physical sufferings. How could they have mental sufferings? Out of compassion, they feel distress for the world, thus they remain for a long time. So do not be discouraged, thinking Buddhahood is far away. Always strive at these collections, so as to eliminate faults and gain good qualities.
Kepolo da demba de dunya chinji sanje ye tando ni yu rimbo kase nena ni nyeba sebi ni ye tende taba chegere so lo da demba de da ni passion ko mare so
So someone who is, you know, who are courageous enough to engage in this practice, they will never get disheartened, regardless of the circumstances, whether it is a favorable circumstance or the unfavorable circumstances one may go through. So long as they have remained, courageous, and such individual will have will brave enough to be in the cyclic existence for eons and eons.
대양스 말 양창저라 초타예버 조고라 대신데 가위에 미니소냐도 숑바 메자데 최대샤와 선제 타예비 시도 터자 상제적인 대 타예버 터번 뇌베 깨네 한데 뒤빠더면 내발라 미네 초타예버 주버 샤오냐네 담바 존나 니 로마로 선제데 이 많이 탕제도 선나 난카다면 봐 담바 요바 데시도 따도 소베 소 타야바 조바 메가 이셰데 데니레 손도 되겠다.
So there here then it explains, also since the completion of endless collection is not difficult, do not discourage yourself with the thought to become a Buddha requires completing limitless collections of merits and sublime wisdom. This is so difficult that I could not possibly do it. First, motivate yourself with the desire to attain goal of limitless Buddha's quality for the welfare for limitless beings you intend to help. Next, focus on remaining in cyclic existence for a measureless period of time and take the Bodhisattva's vow and thinking, I shall accomplish limitless collections. Then, as long as you keep the vows, whether your mind is distracted by the other things or not, sleep or awake, you will constantly accumulate merits as vast as space.
대체 다양 가서 데데시려 니마 지시여로 니마 메지시는 추추기 편시디다 라마처럼 먹은 나 줘봐 상제서 디비 니미시나다 나다 간시다 라마처럼 칼레카고 쳐서 나본지 고시서로 나본지 소용가.
So here we have a saying that that some disciples have said, some disciples have responded to the teacher when the teacher was explaining about the benefits of the practicing Dharma. They responded to the teacher by saying that when you are talking about the benefits of the practicing the Dharma, then it seems that there is a possibility that I can gain the state of enlightenment. Whereas when you speak about speaks about the result of negativities, then not only me that is difficult to gain state of enlightenment, even you as a guru who is giving the teachings may have difficult time to gain state of enlightenment.
다 상추 셈베 넘버라고 지금은 상추 셈베 넘버 답지 손에 지나 냐네 다가랑 뒤도 그래마도 이제 제거해서 돼 말어. 니마니마라 제거여래 아니 제 맞춰긴데 영수 좀 손도 아니나 코로 다가랑 야 선나데 표현 그래마도 수도 냐네 자야스 게메와.
As long as you are able to uphold or to safeguard the Bodhisattva's vow, then needless to mention about developing any kind of negativities, negative thoughts and emotions within us. There's not a single moment or opportunities given to negative thoughts and emotions as long as you are safeguarding your Bodhisattva's vow.
당근에 지 넘발렌스에 넘바스는 슈 넘바스는 손바로와 손바스에서나 파쇼데 네바데 용매지 손고여서나 난 대고 대거와 제단에 가서 줄을 고선여서나 너로를 녀가스키메와.
So here now Domba in Tibetan term, which is translated in English as a precept sometimes, and as sometimes the vows. So Dompa is something that is Dompa. If you are expressed in a noun phrase, you could say it is it's a protections. So what means by what protection? What is being protected? It is being protected from engaging in the negative deeds. That is what meant by the vows. Just like if you are protected by the very strong, bodyguards outside, so then you will be protected from, you know, the harmful actions from your enemies and so forth. So if you're in the same manner, if your mind is protected by observing or safeguarding your bodhisattva's vow, you will be protected from negative deeds, body, speech, and mind.
야, 뒤서 로서 샤, 나 마스 로브서 스페만데 땅가 소야 바사자 감주.
Let's take 10 minutes.
아이, 또 뒤서 신도시야. 로즈 조제 메도 로 니제 니데 제보 상제 신도 민데 베오 로게 노노 신오 조보 유동 구루 메르 로고 노용 노요 미 아이 야 당연히宣주치的录音的点你来去说呢今年能看当啥的去的没的弄觉得他也得人的东西先见他也的先见他也得到你想去三百年这月冬天打了长些的上节你能过把年得到那把呢得呢可是每年往年年要容养到两把年中的把面就讲先见能他也写了先见人是呢他也大数就是他也得呢上节你他也透明干些下刚是把面对呢的理解把的面的都想出把的面对进要把的面些吧得过想出把面将把的面吧那是以错觉人不面头把接到本呢透明就写说我说
So let's read the text. The precious Colin states, with justice in all directions, space, earth, water, fire, and wind are limitless, so we assert suffering beings are without limits. With compassion, the bodhisattvas extricate these limitless beings from suffering and then determine to set them in the Buddhahood. Those remaining steadfast in this way properly make this commitment, and then whether asleep or awake, and even when careless, they constantly accumulate merits as limitless as living beings, for beings are without limits. Because of the limitless of this, know that the limitless Buddhahood is not hard to gain. Those who remain for an immeasurable time seek immeasurable enlightenment for the sake of immeasurable beings and accomplish immeasurable virtue. Hence, though enlightenment is measureless, how could they fail to attain it before long through combination of this four immeasurable way?
Den druye ngone sento chiyo na da ngone sona phe me da tyansa chiyo ma ro tena nga so pa de me ba je se di pa de me ba la ni sanje pa de me be den je ge di che de ne gyo pa de me ba ju go yin di che de ni ta je ba se na re shang ju pa de me ba ta ba che ge da so na den druye sento chiyo na da sona ang ge ni ku ni de cha da ni ku ga ma ro ku ma se ge ni ku de je de ro shang ju san ba to.
So then this is, if we have such a courage, then suddenly we will accumulate merits constantly without a break, right? They constantly accumulate merits as limitless as living beings, for beings are without limit. It's a very beautiful sense. Because of the limitless of this, know that the limitless Buddhahood is not hard to gain. Those who remain for an immeasurable time seek immeasurable enlightenment for the sake of immeasurable beings and accomplish immeasurable virtue. This is a really, if you are able to have such a courage, then it will always, you always on the process of development of spiritual quality.
그래서 쇼지는 가서게 자차를 제대 받 처파 제메도 유선이 지레마도 만에잖아 맞아 소소를 여비 sem바게 크쇼지로 sem비선은 동쇼지기 돈에 연대데 센터지기 돈으로 sem비 떨이마도 베데게 맞선 맞아 난가 동발에 레트 유비선이 지는 말와 당아서 sem바기 공시에는 sem비기 떡던데 지해도아이나 아니 데이거라 아니 대화마도 동의야 말해서 되려면 베데가 손은 지메 제메시에는 손지 말와.
So here it's all talks about the way of a mind, the way we think, and our mental quality. It talks about the development of mental qualities, because if you are able to develop a very courageous mental quality, as we found in those verses, then suddenly there's always possibility. When we look at those verse, it talks about the measureless time, measurable enlightenment, measurable beings, and so forth. It is not something that we were just a word, we were just talking without having any result, because those are not just a resultless talk. If one is able to set one's mind and familiarize one's mind with such practice, that is a result. The result is bound to happen.
공부하기 제선라고 공부 제선라고도 쓰고 세잖아. 배는 가서 저도 통도 가시에나 제 냐이나는 무슨 나는 규는 때는 통사보는 사셔들 소화케케면도 당아 손을 지는 거는 되게 통비걸다 선바 농로로 배지 커주어 나기 전에 진 따투면도 들어와. 된되기 때문에 공시를마도 그지 가르데 지 가서에는 리테샤 되게 계속 말와. 공부당 님이당 랑도기 내생에 뜻다 아니 파쇼기 선제들 초아여바게 아니 로를 공시에 매여생이 되게 돈은 간사를 치반을 받을 세고 세장로 도사리시.
So here now it is all depends on how familiar yourself with the practice. If you try your best to familiarize your mind with such practice, and you will become habituated with this practice. And this practice can be practiced by oneself without putting in much effort. If one really put in effort to familiarize yourself with this practice, this will happen. So, because everything requires a practice of familiarity, it needs to be familiarize yourself with such practice.
저도 배 개첨부 맞아 추연양에서 이때 배 기제대도 레하고 쇼지로 와. 근데 지den게 뭐 샤워 뭐지 매전달에 때 매전달 뭐 좀 내가 제고로. 추연생에도 랑기 칼로데 랑이 랑수도네 친랑 그 담바랑수 제토와이나 아니 랑이기 때도 대화에 제대로도 거라.
So here now the practice of Dharma is unlike the practice of our mundane activities. Right? Because when it comes to the practice of mundane activities, we are maybe some kind of obligations to engage in some activities, or you may need to please someone, or the owner or boss or whoever. just to please those, and you may engage in those activities. So it is completely different from the mundane activities when it comes to the spiritual activities, the Dharma activity, Dharma practice. Dharma practice, is not doing something that to please someone else. One should do it as Dharma by oneself. It is said that one should observe the vows and precepts by oneself and practice, by oneself. And it is not to please someone, or it is not as some kind of obligation. It is not as some kind of someone who impose you to engage in such practices, but it should be voluntarily done by oneself.
Zeba gansa control de rani ki control de ya je mentong ge tanda la karang no ne ka ni ma do pasho gi don la ta ne control de ka to ye mewa.
So for instance, let's talk a practice of patience, right? You're in the beginning, you are confronted with someone who is, who has such a, outlandish attitude, and who shows some outlandish attitude towards yourself, and then you're unable to handle that. You're unable to, defeat that person, and then you try to, engage in the practice of patience. This is not how the practice of patience is done. The practice of patience is not very much to do with the other person, but the practice of patience is to do with oneself. And think about one's own negative thoughts and emotions. If someone says something unpleasant to you, instead of looking at that person and I want to practice patience, but think about yourself by that, expression of unpleasant expression. What may happen to you? You just pay more attention to your mind and try to control that mind and remain undistracted. That is what is meant by the practice of patience.
Shambada ninja da shangchu ji sen shindu shu ta ne yi jebe senjen je den de sanje tum shi la to na nyang ba yin na ne shindu ma cha yang de yi shu na me bi tse du shindu renwa jang ta ye ba la lo go ba dang ka she ma to go ba na thon na de ta son na su nu nyang na Nialang tsubi kao xie na ne, men sen la ju ne ne la, ju sen la ngo su ne la, te chen je ri ji nipa je me de song ne, cang jia wa la che rin de ro de, shang chu ji sen je tab chi je ba shi bi, tsu je yu gong ba, lu ru da tong me je ten la pe ba dang, le pa ge wi shi ro song do.
So then here it says, it is most wonderful to think, if only I could attain Buddhahood in a brief time for the sake of living beings. Because you are moved by the very intense power of your love, compassion, and spirit of enlightenment. However, when you are not within the sphere of these motivations, and you see the necessity of a very long training in the endless deeds, and that much hard work is required, you might think, if this is the case, who could possibly do it? Sorry. If you should then claim that you are seeking a quick path, you directly damage the engaged spirit of enlightenment and indirectly damage the aspirational spirit of enlightenment. Your capacity for the Mahayana lineage steadily weakens, and your enlightenment fades into a remote distance, for you have utterly contradict what Nagarjuna and Asanga determined to the conqueror's own thought on how to increasingly strengthen the spirit of enlightenment.
안데 다 된저와 뭐네 변한 된저와 변한 상바다 니제도 세와 슈 잡이온예 아니 세제게 된다 있는 게 상제적 공부 녀와녀 타고 있어야돼 아니 상하는 중에 대다가 양생 신도니 양생고 신도니 리방 보는 거대로와 대다.
So then, here when it says that it is wonderful to think if I could attain Buddhahood in the brief time for the sake of living beings, because you are moved by the very intense power of your love, compassion, spirit of enlightenment. And this is, referring, actually, this such practice is the practitioner, referring to the practitioner who engages in the Vajrayana practice, who has a sharp or the superior faculty of engaging in the practice of the Dharma.
된저기 상바다 니제게 지교롱게 쇼자에 매바제 니 상제적 공부 타와라 된저기 이름 뭐지고 대다 수니 그리 델레당에 아니 년아치 체고도 세라이나 아니 조선의 무슨 그래 니 회선의 진의 그래 니 대체지 대대 맨으로 손도와.
Without even, then here the worst part is now without even thinking about engaging in the practice of love, compassion, spirit of enlightenment, and seeking at the same time that you are seeking swift enlightenment, then this actually jeopardizes the vows of the aspirational bodhisattva's vow as well as the engaged bodhisattva's vow. So both vows of the bodhisattvas will be damaged or jeopardized by such thought.
다 상주 선배 담바들레네 상주 주셔발라 니 주시 난가 마스지 바도 게 소고인 생에게 아니 지 마저와이나 아니 티신지 릴리 냥로레 티신지 릴리 냥나 제유 공바 아니 제시지 말로 저벨루도 토메니게 아니 상주게 생장지도 무슨 개거로 son도와.
So therefore then it says if one is unable to have a mindset or a strong determinations by taking this bodhisattva's vows, I will engage in the practice to accumulate immeasurable merits to gain the state of enlightenment, even if I have to remain in this secular existence for eons and eons. Without having such a thought, if one tries to then gain long to achieve enlightenment, then it says it directly damaged the engaged spirit of enlightenment and indirectly damaged the aspirational spirit of enlightenment. Your capacity for the Mayana lineage steadily weakened, and your enlightened fades into a remote distance, for you have utterly contradicted with the Nagarjuna and Asanga, determined to be a conqueror's own thought.
네, 가서 가운데 소소한 나 유준보 선체에서 제거에서 쇼발을 호바다 아니 이게 조파 제거에서 아니 대반이데 아니 유준보 호고인 생에데 대사를 조를 해그르서도와 도데 도와 교노데 차기들 유준의 된소나 연다된 하즈 되는데 아니 나소이나 가르사고다 차기 때보다 아니 저부터만이데 mental 차로도. So
here now if one think of gaining state of enlightenment very briefly, swiftly gaining enlightenment without engaging in any practices, without thinking of completing the practice of practice that is required to gain the state of enlightenment. And if then on the other hand, there's an individual who is willing to take a time, and doesn't matter how long it may take, but I will do so by engaging in practice of love, compassion, spirit of enlightenment, even if it takes eons and eons, and I will never discourage, I will never remain disheartened, but continue to practice. So if you were to compare these two individuals who are both of seeking enlightenment and both of having an objective of gaining enlightenment, but one is, doesn't matter how long it takes, the other is looking at swift practice, but the result, well, at the end, the result is achieved by the individual who is actually engaging in the practice and having a determination of staying as long as they want in the secular existence. That result will be done quickly by the other individual. Then the someone who is looking who long to achieve enlightenment, very briefly. So for instance, if you see here, now take an example of that, saying, I will, engage in the practice, the Bodhisattva's practice, such as sixth perfection and so forth, and for the benefit of all sentient beings, until the samsara is emptied. So if you really think carefully and logically, you will not remain in samsaric existence until the samsara is empty of sentient beings, because you have this determinations of remaining in samsara until the samsara become empty of sentient beings, but you're actually engaging and you begin to engage in the practice of six perfections right from now. Suddenly you will not remain in this secular existence until the samsara end. You will gain the state of enlightenment faster, because you are engaging in the secular practice right now, and it will develop and it take you further.
되게 내가 데 가통으로서는 되게 뇽뇽모비 집어다 시시 집어라 카티 장이디 그 잡아도 세선나 세차대 ran신질해 용거마도 열 가에스 되게요 말어. 수도 두고 게요 말어.
So why is because as soon as you set your motivations and determine to engage in the practice of the Bodhisattvas, then you are begin to, applying antidotes towards obscuration of liberation and obscuration of omniscience. So then this is, as long as you are applying antidote towards that, then you will then be able to diminish. You will be able to eradicate those two obscurations.
때 맞아 제세 텔레스엔도 오래 변은 단단마서야 뭐 동네니까 수가들에서는 랑 진지가 랑 진지를 신 진지 수치와 제서나 근데 랑 진지 랑 수지 가서에서나 아니 상주 생게 딱 그런 생이 상황이야 제기 진짜做的 해요 그러.
So what really prevents us from furthering our Bodhisattva's practice is this self-cherishing mind. Our self-cherishing mind is the main impediment which acts as a prevention of furthering our Bodhisattva's quality. So therefore, as if you engage in the practice and try to practice, cherishing for the welfare of others instead of cherishing for oneself, then this will, suddenly will take you to, take you into the territory of the Bodhisattva's land.
또 성문에 제바 쇼칭 쇼체 너 다샤주세면 제바면 나고 말 리진 신동 보는 거로 다 든지게네 간데체는 하고서디 진진 하고요나 아니 다 가르체네 진진 연구돼서디 다 단세디 진진 자르다 랑소고 말이다 간체 든지게 단세단 자와 쇼칭 뭐 여비토네 아니 지 녀모도서 제등에 지 제용데 걸라 아니 주연이 자와데 통 아니 진진데 쇼체는 도용데 니가 그런 몇 비다고 가서 먼저 마서놓고 또 컴바 토칼을 거 란신질해요.
So here now, this self-cherishing mind is then, contributed, facilitated by this self-grasping mind. Although the self-grasping mind is not to say as a root of self-cherishing mind, but it facilitates to giving rise to the self-cherishing mind. So therefore, if one is able to get rid of the self-cherishing mind and moisten our mind by the cherishing of the welfare of other sentient beings, you will then actually climbing the steps of the bodhisattvas, climbing the bodhisattva steps, in other words. Just like someone who wanted to, climb on the rooftop of the house, and you are already without engaging in the journey, you will not automatically be on the rooftop of the house. You have to, take a journey. You have to make a journey to get on the rooftop of the house.
컨트롤 줘서 매마 뜯어 가서 컨트롤 선이지로 이제 저런 얘기만 가서 사마제 봐도 최 가서 가서 동네 마세지 봐도 최상적이라도 최상 가르치는 제와에서는 상주서 말이야 쇼거에서는 진짜 도와 대시 셔서요만 가서는 괜히 랑지를 괜히 잡아줘야지 고추 대응해 지지로.
So here now, in one sense, it is arguable with the bodhisattvas by saying that why bodhisattva you have already gained state of enlightenment, because you already said that you will gain state of enlightenment until we all get state of enlightenment. We can argue with bodhisattvas, right? Because think about here now, this is not the bodhisattvas who wanted to gain enlightenment before us, right? It's not that. It is because his practice, a bodhisattva, he or she engages in the practice and removing all those negativities. Having removed the negativities, even if you don't want to be enlightened, you will be enlightened. Having removed it, your defilements and obscurations.
대단하서 쇼네 되바네 제라양 매편신 제신던 조에 상주 주비 터나 레바시바시네 로신되나 대난 주바 라다여바다 자데 제로레 송도 하자.
So then here it says, thus, since becoming discouraged and remaining so bring no benefit at all and only leads to further discouragement. Understand well method for achieving enlightenment and uplift your mind. When you do this, the completion of your aim is as if in your hand.
당가서 뒤지에는 데려러 왔다. 맞아 gen고에는 세에는 이제는 다 양라들의 양인데 엄보들의 양비가 당에 최제 도금도 다 강바 나가도 가서 배비 논설이 불문 나가도 샤트 지지 제도금도 세야 돼. 뭐네잖아. 추랑이 뭐네 정해나 선바 tempo 데비가라 선바 코로나 상다 니제당 다 정도 친절을 공부되는 대행에서나 코로나 뭐기 센터로 위에도.
So here we, particularly in our Tibetan community, we have some elderly folks complain about unable to engage in the practice because I have pain on my knees, my wrist, and my back, and so on and so forth. But this is not the primary practice. We're not the main practice that we're talking about here. The practice, of course, those are the contributory factor of accumulating merits and so forth. But when it comes to the actual practice is really done by one's own mind, by controlling one's mind, by understanding the nature of one's mind. And this is what we need to do, right from the beginning of practice, taking refuge in rituals and generating bodhicitta and so forth, are all practice that requires a mental process. It is the practice, mental practice is almost more significant than the physical practices.
대체 로 레파시는 로스니 되세요. 개체부로 변화가서 이제 대비지 변조 첨부 차생에도 다가 총포는 용식으로 단단가 속이 단단 생제 연된생에 때만 추기 뒷바로 맞서는 싸네 라니 라기 공지 라운데네 야번에 이 산제살은 로그에 진짜디 라니 라기지 맞나다 다시 젠면도
So it's always, when it comes to the practice of Dharma, it is done by oneself. The practice of Dharma will not done on your behalf by someone else and you accumulate merit. That's not what's going to happen, because it requires our individual practice for individuals' freedom or individual enlightenment. Just like, when you speak about accumulating merits, we will not be able to complete accumulation of merits in no time. This is not what is going to happen. It requires a measureless time, and accumulation merits can be done on the basis of drop by drop.
Drupa lana yobata data city, Takanja social carrot chan majana social lapana yore, Lo Rani la Pobache, Rani la Raja Jane, Tanta Tadi Sanji, the country payment, Rani Laban yobata chip chidare, Tati Bejo Tomata Sosoroa.
So yes, everything is in our hand. Whether you do it or not is but if you're really determined to engage in the practice of Dharma, to gain state of enlightenment for the benefit of other beings, everything is in our hands. It's not something that is out of our hand. It is not something that is out of our control. We can do it. Yes, everything is in our hands. So here, now quality of the Dharma is not something that can be pinpointed as we pinpoint the quality of our mundane objects or mundane resources or our wealth and so forth. This is not something like that, because the Che or the Dharma itself in roughly must be understood in terms of transforming one's mind and developing the positive quality of one's mind. It's said to be or Dharma, or said to be the meaning of Dharma. So here again it says, the garland of bird story says, discouragement does not have to free you from misfortune. So rather than torment yourself in sorrow, develop stable proficiency in the required goals. Then even the very difficult becomes easy, bringing liberations. So achieve what must be done by the indicated method, without making yourself fearful and unhappy. Support yourself with stability that has the brilliance of proficiency. Then the achievement of all aim is in your hand.
Papa Tomeji ja Chembola, Luciano Lepa, Shejang Shumba Meba Yete, Niema Zanji Chu Shi Mijipa Nida Dembashi, Goba Yang Somba La City, Tiba de Chilorojida, Hina Tata to the Medusa and the old Machigo. 양양 파바통매 양양 수업가 됐어.
So then here's Arya Sangha has repeatedly that you have both to know well the method of training in extensive practice without being discouraged, and to not to satisfy it with only minimal qualities.
대로 파바통매 가르쳐 오잖아. 아니 되게 자체비 중라 아니 저당 냥네 제식이 시바제 아니 시에네 숑바제는 메데와제 아니 메데나야 예데 나레 장지랑지려야나 다랑기 초단 데바제나 지금 말이에요.
So here now, Asanga has stated that one should always try to engage in the practice. When it comes to the practice, you should not be contented by any kind of practices. You should always look for a continual practice, and you should always have a genuine aspiration to continue your practice. You should not be just satisfied by one part of quality of the one part of practice, because by saying that, oh, I've done this practice, now it is enough for me. You shouldn't be just satisfied with that minimal practice or quality of practice.
다네 손도 다 저러면지 연주로 파바토면 들서나 다 뒤송이 뒤서 냥네 쟁에 내단도 보지 소도 다네서 연대 단하르 연대 천이바 인장 쇼지장시 제나 랑 첨보시 제도 냥네 대거 공배 초반전라지 랑제네 케바시게 롱리지 지원의 때네 대연대지 차이지 이면 原家대长就看样没信到些大觉的国际系熊呢，一信的熊呢，罗汤也，原点学的一求吧，名字吧，公别七八错啊，老家他也把了，多国讲熊吧没把呢，信的更把汤我送的的。
So now here it says, it's now by Lama Tsongkhapa himself by saying that at present, you think I have reached a high level of the path. When you have produced a single approximation of a good quality, even if it is an actual good quality, it is only one aspect of the path. You are content to meditate solely on it. But then those knowledge in the key points of the path explains from within the guidelines of the scripture and reasoning that it is indeed a fraction of virtue, but with just that alone, you have not reached anywhere. When you understand that, when you understand what they have said, you become extremely discouraged. Thus, those who do not remain satisfied with just some portion of virtue, you seek high distinctions, and who are not discouraged, even with the necessity to learn limitless trainings, are extremely rare.
다 개발된 적이 논들이 받는 때에 인천하게 간 된데 저거지다 야보래다 되게다 참 사자 계획해고 말해서는 거라 아니 신된 숑바체 아니 숑바체 보면서 얘한테 공마 생애다 랑치바제 라자 연수 저거 타야바제 로로니지 단단히 신는 까본도 송도.
So now here what this really explains is the Lama Tsongkhapa was trying to say is now when someone, for instance, is engaging in one portion of meditations and contented or satisfied by that particular meditations by thinking this is my ultimate goal of practicing Dharma, and you become so satisfied with one minimal spiritual quality, what it's called. So then when such an individual is met by a learned masters and advising him or her, saying that this is just a minimal quality. You should not remain just contented by this minimal quality of practice. Rather, you should, continue to seek for a more practices and transiting from one practice to another practice to gain state of enlightenment. And when such a word is heard by this individual who is contented by a minimal practice, then will become so disheartened. So therefore, you should not be following the example of those practitioners. We should always remain determined, so strong determination, have a strong determination to engage in the practice, or the entire path and grounds. So one must always remain contented when it comes to the mundane activities, such as working for one's own, welfare, one's own, working for oneself to become, wealthy and so on and so forth. In other words, one should always remain contented, But when it comes to the development of mental quality, in other words, the spiritual quality, one should not remain contented. One should always look for a further development of one's own mind.
Yeah,
So now here, what we need to know, it's important to know about by going through this particular teachings of the perfection of joyous perseverance, is to have a proper understanding of how do we really, eliminate those laziness, the three kinds of laziness, right? The laziness of procrastinations. In order to eliminate the laziness of procrastinations, one should remain focused on the practice of importance of having this precious human rebirth and focusing on the making this precious human rebirth meaningful and so on. So then we have another laziness that is to be eliminated, which is that I have no time because I have something else to do. This is always with us. Oh no, I'm not going to do it right now. I have something else to do. So this is one obstacle that we always have it. So then the last one is the discouragement. You become so disheartened, thinking that without going through the analysis of whether or not one is able to practice, you simply said that to gain the state of enlightenment requires a limitless time, limitless eons, and so forth. And for me, I'm not able to do that. And you have this, disheartening attitude towards yourself is then another obstacle for practicing the perfection of joyous perseverance. Those three laziness must be eliminated by understanding and going through the practice that we have explained in this particular chapter.
네, 그래서 상주선비 아니 양래를 때는 자네 소고래다 단단히 뒤전다 가서 라운드 단다 유해신 바로 나사라도 유해신 바래 다 중에 때 가서 라이 쪼고 보다.
So this is the kind of the problem that we always have. All of us have these problems. Now, by understanding these problems and realizing that this is the kind of sickness that I have, I must do something to alleviate myself from this sickness. And we have to put an effort and have a determination to, work yourself, to eliminate yourself, elevate yourself from the sickness of those laziness.
다 니바 텐체가 됐지로 니바 텐체 초된데 텐체 봉기 초사발라 제 매바당 템바당 가이 떠제바 도이 떠소 소도.
So then here, gathering the forces of favorable conditions. So this section has 4 parts. It's developing the power of aspiration, developing the power of steadfastness, and developing the power of joy. The 4th, develop the power of relinquishment. We'll stop here with this today. So the dedication.
단다 추서니 선나 던지지게래나 겨와사바다 쇼 예 대당 안디선도 사비 겨와나 아니 상 사제 상추 사마나지 투마 강스바 대나기 지용 쇼세네 니 저다데는 말아래 니데 디노는 니 신대저샤.
So then here by means of how do we dedicate our merit series? Now by means of accumulating merits for this 2 hours of our time, the 2 hours times of accumulation of merits, and also combining the merits that we have accumulated in 3 times, past, future, and the present. And may all these merits become a cause for the liberation and the enlightenment, state of enlightenment of oneself and all other beings. So this will then become a favorable condition. If one is able to dedicate one's merit in this way, will become a favorable conditions for accumulation of merits.
点别人波跟上能接触，年年周边见到你些手，让给姐姐多别能接你，修着自愿正月都给姐，若月月节面包随些年，要也点波有人真纠结。两波人间出给马家木，悄悄两波就为说的呢，年纪轻白一绕就波，偏偏点点是我是我说，世间教育民众真的呢，来着上就能就天边中，他的能就一浪别的心。教育自我人多终究起，朗诵主编定情主席经，给进世界门道明明根，写到更多教育好不易，朗读这我莫就记，光学听不出了知识经，期间住了怎么地边去。多点能就多多出些抓些将次数，有就人间就在那面不在少点钱，能够听的手指就不能，罗上点别正面所送的，若也没想到。念就解，帮助人过于心高手，别当的我的永远。现在在我的人叫作业，小别身体不多点就解，将别抱怨知道前方，更多让我这样的人的，得到个人就是道路。给我的道当街绕多我，就从西边叫我当街，我光了就多我把的，大街给月找我的给你，让我谢谢绕多我。哎呀，多谢，thank you。